Hi, and welcome to everyone for a special panel discussion today with a team of Redapt's experts around adopting Kubernetes. Really excited to have you here for the conversation. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about the benefits, pitfalls of adopting Kubernetes, talk through some use cases of what you can be thinking about for your organization, and also explore a little bit about how Redapt can help organizations accelerate their adoption. So I want to welcome in the team here. Now, I have three of Redapt's key experts on this topic here. Matt Francis, Senior Director of Storage and Platforms. Hi, Matt. Good to have you.
Thank you.
Mike Little, the Director of Engineering Services. Mike.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And Paul Welch, the Senior Vice President of Product Engineering.
Thank you.
Cool. Well, I know we're talking about it's a big topic, and this is a funny thing to ask for like an easy explanation, because we could go for hours talking about Kubernetes. But can one of you, maybe Mike, dive in first and give me an explanation of, like, at a high level, how should someone who isn't as familiar with Kubernetes think about it? And, what is the elevator speech, if you will, for Kubernetes?
Yeah, I'm happy to help there. So Kubernetes is an orchestration layer for containers, and we'll unpack that a little bit. But containers allow you to run your applications in a very defined environment, and Kubernetes allows you to orchestrate those containers across a vast array of compute resources. So a big pool of resources in a cluster, and Kubernetes orchestrates where those run and how they connect to each other. Pretty amazing, relatively new technology that a lot of our customers are finding a great amount of value with.
Yeah, and our customers are definitely starting adopting it because it changes their development model. Instead of having to work on a monolithic application that has a lot of interdependencies, and whenever you try to introduce a new feature, you have to retest the entire stack. The containerization that Mike was talking about allows them to focus on individual services and only iterating the changes in those services, which means organizations are able to adopt features in their applications at a much more rapid pace.
What I would add is, from a business perspective, what everyone's trying to do is deliver new apps and features faster. And Kubernetes is a great platform to enable you to build and run your applications at a much faster velocity.
And as we think about this, like, one of the key benefits we talk about is Kubernetes, right, allows someone to manage applications across multiple clouds and inside of a data center, on-prem data center as well. Paul, can you talk a little bit more about that and those benefits that the Kubernetes provides?
Sure. So Kubernetes will take all of your infrastructure resources and treat them as a pool that's runs all of your applications. And the orchestration layer is the same software that runs no matter which provider you're running it in, whether it's a public cloud or in some bare metal servers in your data center. And so to the application team, the way they package the application, and to your SRE teams and operations teams, the way that they deploy and manage the applications is the same. So really gives you a consistent manageability for the process.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the power comes in and the fact that we've talked about all the services are now decoupled from each other. That also allows us to run those services in different locations and scale those services independently of each other. So for instance, if you're running a web store, you may need to have more resources dedicated to the front end. And then at other times during the day, there may be more resources required for the backend checkout service. Kubernetes has the ability to spin up and down resources on demand, which makes it much more flexible and much more adaptable to the demands that are being put on it.
Yeah. Can one of you, and Mike, maybe you can talk to this or hand off to one of the others, but I'm interested to hear about how Kubernetes helps people move into an agile development, we've been talking around it here that it creates much more agility versus a typical old school waterfall process of development. But how does Kubernetes really help someone take that leap into an agile workflow?
As you re-architect your application to take advantage of containers and Kubernetes in a much more smaller service or what's referred to as microservice architecture, the impact of a given change is much smaller, because your account service can make changes, but your a payment service doesn't need to make any changes, right? As long as the contract between those services is met, you can make subtle changes. So it allows you to be a lot more agile, but and have a much higher velocity, because you're making changes to your service. You're not having to test across the whole monolith of your application. You're testing you're validating the contract between services for each change. But beyond that, you don't have to worry about how they interact, because that's handled by the what I refer to as the contract, even though there's no lawyers involved, so it's a lot easier.
Absolutely. That's great to talk. We've talked a little bit about benefits here. I'd love to shift into discussing a few of the challenges. One of the things that maybe, Matt, you could speak to a little bit is Kubernetes can be simple to deploy at a small scale, but how does someone think through effectively scaling up Kubernetes and doing it in a way that stays efficient?
Yeah, absolutely. You can get a Kubernetes cluster running in a minute, but that is definitely on a small scale. The real challenges come around whenever you try to run Kubernetes at scale, not only from the operational perspective, but also a security perspective, right? And one of the challenges around that right now is, since it is a newer technology, a lot of times you have to be able to find the talent out in the public, which tends to be a lot more challenging than traditional virtualization architectures. So being able to find the right talent and put the right processes in place can definitely be a little bit cumbersome.
Can one of you, maybe Paul, if you can, talk a little bit more about the security challenges that someone faces? So obviously you're finding the right talent, you're trying to retool your processes, but specific to security, what does someone need to be thinking about as they're adopting Kubernetes?
Yeah, sure. So I think with security is such a big topic, but it's a lot of it is about looking at your attack surface. But in some ways, Kubernetes can be a much more secure environment. There's tooling out there to do things like scan your containers for security vulnerabilities before you deploy them. There are tools and techniques to make sure that all of your traffic is encrypted in flight. And of course, there's all the same security technologies for anything else in your environment, like monitoring tools. And Mike, what else could you add?
Yeah, I mean, as Paul mentioned, security is a pretty broad topic, but in general, Kubernetes has some challenges because it's a shared resource. Those challenges aren't really different than kind of the containerization technologies at a basic level. But they become bigger problems as you scale, right? You potentially have a noisy neighbor problem if you're not dealing with sort of resource allocation, but you also have, an internal network that you have to be very cognizant of how it's designed, so that you can isolate your workloads, at the appropriate level. As Paul mentioned, mutual TLS to for transport security. The nice thing, if done well, right, containers are immutable. So the container itself, shouldn't need a heavy write layer. Again, some of this is design, and whether it's worth it to go to the effort of doing that is often a decision that they have to make, right? There's some challenges around it, but there's some benefits. So it's finding out if it's worth it, and it's kind of taking that whole view of security, Paul mentioned monitoring, et cetera, is super important with even outside of Kubernetes. But since we're talking Kubernetes, that's the focus here. The nice thing is that if a container gets compromised in a well-designed environment, you can kill the container and start it, and Kubernetes can start up another one, very quickly, right? So the ability to limit impact using certain techniques is available as well.
Great. So another thing that we often talk about is, right, all development teams or all organizations have different skill sets, different processes they're going through. What type of organization is going to be best kind of set up to dive into Kubernetes right away versus maybe need to do some background work. Matt, can you share a little bit about kind of what type of organization you think is ideally more ready to adopt this containerization approach?
Yeah, at a high level, organizations that have already started to work on DevOps, in which their developers are able to work alongside with operations for the deployment of the products. The customers that are doing that are more mature inside of DevOps are really going to be the ones that will find the adoption of Kubernetes to be most advantageous and the easiest for them to start adopting.
Cool. And then for those organizations that are less ready, kind of, there's always a spectrum of technical maturity, right? Inside of organizations, what is, like, if someone is hasn't adopted DevOps yet, they are maybe need to do some work. How do you recommend, Paul, getting the foundation in place so that they can get started? Obviously, there's a lot you can do there, but what is the high level first steps that you would take?
I think it's important to assess where you're at first and understand where the gaps are to build those capabilities to be able to do Kubernetes optimally. And I think I always recommend to customers that it's always good to start with an application out of your portfolio that is closest to being able to be containerized, and do a pilot or a proof of concept with that first. Take what you learn and then bring that to your other app teams.
Great. Anything else to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, well, obviously this is self-serving, but I think it's important to work with a partner that has done it, right? If you're an organization that is at a lower level of maturity, as far as DevOps and kind of modern best practices, having a friend to ride along with you is great. And obviously, I think Redapt's a great choice for that. But again, a little self-serving on that.
Yeah,
side.
We'll talk about that in a little bit. Anyways, I think it's important for people to understand how you guys can help and where you can add value in the process. I'd love to shift to talking a little bit about a few different use cases of how, like, if someone's thinking about, like, what should I do next? Where should I think of adopting first? How can this benefit my organization? Matt, do you have a specific use case that you think that you could bring up around Kubernetes adoption that is pretty common for people to be able to think about and benefit from?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the use cases that I can think of is a retail use case. And this is a customer that we worked with that has several different entities around the US in retail locations. And really their main goal was to be able to deploy software to those retail locations where there wasn't a lot of IT talent in order to drive all the operations inside of their store. So things that were really important for them was the ability to have or the capability to be able to push out the updates to the software that they need, but also more importantly to make sure that all of the different versions of the applications that we're running were all consistent. So whenever that one store got an update, so did another one. One of the nice things at Redapt is we have a portfolio of different Kubernetes distributions that we have. So with this customer, we were able to help them work with one of those platforms that really had a strong support for global consistency of application deployments.
Nice. Excellent. So we have retail. Are there other, Mike or Paul, are there other industries or specific applications you think are especially beneficial for people to be thinking about?
I think it's hard to be specific, right? Because we've worked with folks that are putting Kubernetes clusters in cars, for self-driving capability, kind of stuff, right? So there's that very small scale where the cluster is very small, and as Matt said, that ability to push out new versions of the application in a basically a programmatic way was super valuable. And then we have other folks that are just, as they're containerizing their applications and moving, and they're maybe in one cloud and maybe for a specific customer. So, we have SaaS customers that maybe for a specific customer, they need to be in a different public cloud. And that ability to have a consistent deployment environment across, physical or locational environments is super powerful. So that's, and Matt mentioned the distributions, every public cloud has their own. There's several, sort of third party, you can always build it yourself from the open source side. We don't necessarily recommend running that in production unless you really have a group of skilled folks. But the interface is consistent across all of those. If they're certified as a Kubernetes distribution, the Cloud Native Compute Foundation basically mandates that the API, the interface is identical. So your developers, your SREs are going to have a consistent experience, across clouds.
Yeah, Mike mentioned that we've worked with customers to deploy very small clusters at many edge locations, and then I wanted to bring up that we've also worked at the other extreme of the other extreme. We've worked with several gaming companies, for example, massively multiplayer game backend engines where they needed to scale dynamically to support all these millions of users coming online to play a game.
Cool. So it can really scale and flex up from a very small scale all the way up to that global super complex compute process to support something like a gaming platform. Great. Let's shift and just to close out our conversation, talk a little bit about how an experienced partner like Redapt can help someone accelerate their process. So I'd love to really talk first about, what is that value? Mike, you dove into this a little bit, but what's the value, Paul, of bringing in someone like Redapt to help out and help accelerate that adoption process?
I'd say that the first value that we bring is our experience. We've been working with the project since almost the beginning of Kubernetes, and we've done hundreds of implementations with customers in all sorts of environments and use cases and industries. And we bring all of that experience to customers to help them avoid the pitfalls and bring their clusters up to production ready much faster than they could do it on their own.
Matt, anything on your side to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. As a full capability services provider, we can really help customers across the spectrum in their journey. So whether customers are taking their first foray into containerization and have an older monolithic application that they want us to help modernize, we're able to provide services around that. We also have the capabilities of not only helping them stand up the Kubernetes platform of their choice, but also all of the ancillary services that are necessary in that ecosystem to enable it, like ID and access management, network services, source code repositories, container registries, CI/CD pipelines. So we can give a customer the full-fledged experience of how to actually start adopting and using the platform without having to go through a lot of struggles on their own.
Excellent. And last question here, Mike, is around how you guys partner in and kind of equip the teams that you're working with at clients to be able to think better about Kubernetes. How do you work with them to help them understand best practices for deployment and management?
I think we do a really good job of meeting customers where they're at and where they're coming from. We go through a process we call discovery, but it's really getting to know the customer, know what their business challenges are, and then we can, as a collaborative effort, can design, based on best practices, the approach that they should take, and then help implement it. Again, if the customer really is focused on design but is comfortable doing the implementation, or that would like help with the design but is comfortable doing the implementation, we're okay with that too, right? But we have that ability to work at every level, whether it's a customer that, like you said, is just getting into the idea of, hey, this Kubernetes thing sounds like it might be helpful. We can help them decide if they're, if they've been doing it for a while and they're running into challenges. We have experts on staff that can dive in, figure out where they're at, figure out the best approach going forward, and help them move there. So kind of runs that gamut.
Great. Excellent. Well, I want to thank all three of you for your time today to kind of come and have a conversation. I know we've talked high level, and I want to invite anyone who's interested in learning more about how Kubernetes could help accelerate their own organization's technology, how you could kind of move forward with adopting Kubernetes for the use cases that are relevant to your business, to reach out and get in touch with Redapt. I know any one of the experts over at Redapt will be up for jumping in and having that conversation, and really, I think, digging in, as Mike said, understanding your specific instance and your specific needs, and hopefully developing a solution that's going to help you. So thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next time. Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.